All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rob Smalley, and I am a program officer here at ACYPL. Thank you for joining us today for our 22nd virtual town hall in partnership with the U.S. Department of State. Today's discussion will be centered on how housing policy across the country has evolved since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March of 2020, and what we expect and hope to see develop as we enter the next stage of the outbreak. As the pandemic swept across the United States, issues facing tenants, landlords, and people experiencing homelessness came to the forefront of the national discussion. With so many people unable to work due to safety concerns and economic difficulties, complex challenges have arisen for those in the housing sector. Politicians and citizens have responded by issuing a national eviction moratorium and recent extension, as well as cash payments to citizens and rent and mortgage leniency. We'll discuss these issues with two ACYPL alumni who have worked in housing for much of their careers and who have helped navigate the tricky policy issues and pressures that the pandemic has brought to bear. Our first panelist is April Griffin, who is the executive director of the Affordable Housing Commission in St. Louis, Missouri, a role that she has held since 2013. The AHC is a commission which undertakes research to publish information on the state of affordable housing in the city of St. Louis. April traveled with ACYPL to New Zealand in 2009. Our second panelist is Mike Tulien, who is a construction official for the borough of Point Pleasant Beach in New Jersey. Mike has worked in housing and construction for over 13 years and works to solve issues of housing with the New Jersey state government on a daily basis. He's also a former councilman for Point Pleasant Borough in New Jersey, where he helped set housing policy for his community. Mike traveled with ACYPL to South Africa and Botswana in 2017. Thank you both so much for joining us. And to begin, we want to start by reflecting on the state of the housing market as the pandemic was first emerging in March 2020 to better understand where we are today. So to start off, I want to bring our discussion to the state of the market right as the pandemic hit. Like I said, in April, I'll start with you. Where was the housing market right as the pandemic began, and how did the pandemic change sort of the nature of the market in those first few months?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. Here in the city of St. Louis, pre-COVID, we had a shortage of about 32,000 affordable housing rental units. We have about 30,000 households on a waiting list with the St. Louis Housing Authority to be able to get vouchers to attain subsidies that would help pay for them to have some quality affordable housing units. We have about 59% of our city's neighborhoods are low to moderate income. We have a critical high need for infrastructure in the city. While we were working very diligently with the resources that we received from the federal government, it still was not enough to bring the numbers down significantly where we are falling short in affordable units for households. We had a large population of homeless individuals. Many of them who are unhoused have mental illness as well. They also have health conditions. They have addictions. Oftentimes, when you are assessing and providing case management for the homeless, you find that there are layered issues. So the issue is never, hardly ever, seldom that they just only need a place to stay. And so we also have a lot of vacant homes and a lot of vacant property. While that provided a challenge, it also provided an opportunity for redevelopment. St. Louis has a lot of old historic all brick homes. And so even the existing homeowners need assistance in home repair funds. It's very costly to keep up the maintenance and make the major and minor home repair. What makes that almost impossible is that in the city of St. Louis, there has existed for a long time great disparity between the population of African Americans and the population of whites. St. Louis is predominantly almost 50-50. And so you have a disparity in the income gap which the average median income annually before COVID for a white household was around 61,000 a year. For a African American household, it's about 31,000 a year. So you see, there's a great gap there in the wealth and in the income that you have available to pay for housing and the things that you need. As we have created increasingly new housing in the way of for sale rental, for sale home ownership, as well as rental, it still is a large gap that needs to be heavily subsidized in order to even create an affordable unit. And we know that while the government has its affordable scale, oftentimes people who are living in low to moderate income levels still don't agree that that's affordable. It's very important to have a great public transportation system close to the housing, and we don't have that as well. We had been working on increasing the public transportation, but there's still many routes that need to be opened, as well as public transit through way of what we call a metro link, a train. And so we know the lack of housing is at the core of a variety of economic and social conditions. And so ensuring everyone, regardless of their income, has a stable, affordable housing is vital, really, to the stability and growth and the equity of our city. And so we were working as diligently, as quickly as we could to increase that. But once again, everything came to a halt once COVID hit.
And Mike, from your perspective and in your hometown, how did the market change in the first few months in New Jersey?
Thanks for having me as well, Rob. Pleasure to speak here with April, Tim. So the market made a dramatic change, obviously. And I'm more of in the suburb areas outside of Philly and New York, in the middle there. So construction was humming along pretty good in the area pre-COVID. And then once it happened, there was a pause or a blip, maybe 2 or 3 months, as people were trying to figure out what can do, how can we do things. And then as people moved from their urban areas to their suburban areas around us, populations increased for full-time residents. We have a lot of summertime residents come down here. So basically, construction just took off 3 months into it, which was pretty wild. So you couldn't find anybody to do any work for you. If you could, they were backed up. And then we had issues with supply lines that showed up after a while, because even though people are using wood and pavers and other things to build housing, whether they be some affordable housing, some regular housing, in some cases some multi-million-dollar houses, it became very competitive to get the products that were out in the market, because the new products weren't being made because they're made in factories where people work closely together, and so the supply dried up. So you had a major demand, increased prices, so that in the end, April's talking about affordable housing. I did a lot of affordable housing work before COVID. I don't see in my immediate area, in the short term, that we're going to be able to go back to just the economics of building an affordable housing unit. Usually you do it to scale. I did a ordinance for affordable housing in our town. So you basically could build more units on a lot, therefore lowering the price per unit. Even in that equation today, it's not going to work. Hopefully that corrects itself in a little bit of time. But so basically, things were humming along construction-wise. They're going crazy construction-wise now, but they're definitely pricing people out of the market. So I think that K recovery that they talk about is definitely there. We have a shortage of rental housing, shortage of regular housing, and then we went from a lot of seasonal housing to full-time housing, and definitely about half the state of New Jersey.
And obviously, when the pandemic hit, there were plenty of challenges that everyone faced, and there was a need for government intervention in many places. What legislation was introduced at that time that you thought was helpful? And is there other legislation that wasn't passed maybe that would have been helpful? And Mike, I'll start with you.
Sure. So there was a lot of executive orders performed in New Jersey. And New Jersey is a home rule state. So for those that don't know, if it's absent in the state or the county government, the local government gets to make up their own rules. So a lot of that had to deal with restaurants. So part of the executive order, and then eventually became part of something that came out of the legislature, was allowing outside dining and expansion of outside dining, and ABC, which governs our liquor licenses in New Jersey. So they did allow that and tried to make it clear for all the local governments. There was hiccups here and there in different towns, but basically it allowed these restaurants or bars or whatever else to move outside to allow them to try and continue working. So that was very helpful because there was a lot of local rules that they pretty much wiped the plate clean with for the time being. These are all temporary rules. But that allowed something to happen. So it was probably one of the better ones I saw. There was plenty of bad and crazy stuff. We'll probably talk about it later, the eviction moratoriums and forbearance moratoriums. It sounds good in the interim, but maybe it's not great in the long term. People suffer on both sides. And then just a lot of confusion. You had different rules and executive orders come out that sounded great today, and then by Sunday morning, they're going to be horrible. So getting those communications out, and the money that came out through COVID CARES Act and a couple other things, it was never really communicated well to the local authorities, and half the time the state authorities had no idea what they're talking about either. So there's no perfect way to do that, but maybe we learn from our mistakes and go forward from there.
Yeah, and April, I'll turn to you, and we'll get in a little bit later to some of the bureaucratic hurdles that I know you've both faced in your work with things that have come down. But was there any legislation that was introduced in St. Louis that you thought was, or in Missouri that you thought was particularly helpful? And is there something that you wish would have happened that may have made some things better?
I think just like Mike, we passed on the local level as well as the state a lot of executive orders. And those were able to be passed, many of them because of the president enacting a emergency and giving the authority for these mega waivers to be able to bypass some of the normal compliance that's generally standard for procurement and expenditures. Once that was passed, we were able locally to bypass a lot of the normal bureaucracy that people often experience when you're trying to get your day-to-day business handled. And so we definitely needed to be given the authority to be able to spend funds, whether they were in our budget or not. And then if we didn't have money in our budget to put new processes and procedures in place, we needed to know where are we going to get it from. And the city would go into their coffers, maybe funds that are on projects that are on hold or funds that are on in reserves, but be able to spend them for uses that weren't previously appropriated, which are general laws don't allow that. You would have had to go through the annual budget process. And so it was very critical moment. And I would say, I think that our administration at that time did a good job with trying to put together all the pieces to get the departments really ramped up and the capacity and infrastructure to help the citizens. But at the same time, one of the most critical things were trying to protect our own employees, who we need to keep the doors open and provide the services and the answers to the residents and business community to let them know what are the new procedures and processes when it comes to closing restaurants, shutting down convention centers, schools shutting down, transportation cut back, access to job training, access to health clinics, on and on. It just trickles all the way throughout your total government. And so you need people to operate these systems. And so we had to keep them well. And then their children are out of school. So you also had emergency family medical leave acts put in place where you still have to provide the pay, but you allow them to be on family medical leave or family leave and still work from home. Those that were able to do that because now they have children at home who have to be tended to and oftentimes have to need some assistance in carrying out their assignments, their school assignments while they're in class during the day. So it was chaotic for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to dive in a little bit more to some of maybe the bureaucratic hurdles that each of you faced during the pandemic. What were some of those challenges? And, was it difficult to have to operate with so much bureaucracy as people tried to utilize the available funds and resources from the government? And April, I'll start with you.
Ab- Absolutely, because you even had some supplies that were needed. You know, you have to give your first line responders or policemen. Policemen have to keep working, but they needed to be prepared and to have the PPE that they needed, the firemen, the EMTs on your ambulance, your healthcare workers, all of those you had to quickly try to find the funds to not just supply them, but where do you buy these large quantities of these supplies that you need overnight that you didn't even need before, right? So you don't even have everything that you need to reduce the risk in your office and in your different areas of those essential workers. And so, you know, at times you can find Lysol, right? Where does the city get cases and cases of Lysol, cases and cases of masks, on and on. And so that was a challenge. But I tell you, one thing that I did see is a lot of people pulling together. I mean, even people going out to the store, getting there early, waiting in line, and then trying to get as much as you could and bring back to work so that you have enough to share. And so I see a lot of sharing, just a real humanitarian effort that went forth because the need was so great. And when you deal with also having to enforce the laws, you have a real balance there. I talked about us having a large homeless population. Well, you're coming out with these executive orders and making mandates to follow certain procedures, but you have to consider that there are people who don't even have access to the things they need to be able to follow those orders. They're certainly not going to be able to social distance and to wash their hands and to wear a mask when they don't have access to those things. And oftentimes they're still coming up to people on the street asking you for money. They're coming up in as they're congregating in the parks, which most homeless populations in metropolitan areas tend to come to the core, which is going to be the city, the downtown area. And so we continue to have an increase and an influx, but trying to deal with those populations that are the most vulnerable and are the hardest hit is a real challenge that no legislation can address.
Right. And Mike, from your perspective, I'm sure there were plenty of bureaucratic hurdles in New Jersey as well. And what was that like? What was the implementation of some of these things? Were there difficulties? And if there were, what were those difficulties?
So I was actually at my previous job when this started rolling out and the first CARES Act rolled out. I was at the USDA Rural Development, and we do a lot of direct money lending for people, first-time home buyers, refinance, and then multiple family units that we finance as well. So pretty much what we do is we get mortgage applications in and we help these people low and very low income. So the money was still there technically to purchase properties. However, now I can't have my employees meet with these people face to face. It's not necessarily a potential homeowner that has access to a scanner at home to put all of his documents together or even send something. Maybe doesn't even have a regular smartphone to really access. So you have the thing that there is now a extra pool of money to get people into housing, which is very useful, but the practicality of getting them into the house was just getting their information together was not possible. And then, but some of the things we did kind of pivot and push forward that were planned to be done, but weren't yet done. So like appraisals. So if someone buys a house, the appraiser comes in the house and takes a look around. The federal government, when we do a mortgage, we want the tippy top best appraisal you can get. So we really know what we're getting into. However, we kind of pivoted to a drive-by appraisal or an appraisal with somebody sending pictures from a real estate agent or a homeowner. Same thing with a couple other items that we do, maybe home inspections, or I used to have my staff actually go out and look at the houses if something did show up on the appraisal. So we kind of pushed ourselves to a much more tele type of work with that situation if we could align with a borrower or a buyer that could keep up with that. Same thing with we helped get a lot of money out through the CARES Act. However, getting communications to the correct people so that they can know what to apply for is huge. So there's still money coming out. I learned from April the other day that I went looking into. The communication is not coming from the state of New Jersey to the local municipalities. So luckily we have networks of people like, hey, go look for this. There was in South Jersey, there was part of a county organization that brought myself, SBA, other different state things like the EDA out of the state that helped get that communication across. So those were weekly meetings where they invited anybody that was like a policymaker or someone who was running a nonprofit or someone who was in charge of a large business. Anyone who was involved to come in and get 5-minute updates from myself and 10 other people to say, hey, this program exists. If you need more information, this is my number, call me. So there was some ways that some communities came around to get that word out. You had to change it. But it was just, I think personal networking was more successful than, maybe everyone heard advertisements for the PPP from SBA. But then what did you do? They didn't even tell you in that advertisement, you need to call your local banker and your local banker has to apply for you. It was like, did everyone skip that part? So I think networks were the better way. If people came together, like April said, to help each other, whether it was for themselves, getting some toilet paper or Lysol, or making sure that their university didn't shut down forever. So,
yeah. So now I want to shift a little bit to some tangible actions that were taken during the pandemic that have really affected the market and continue to affect the market to this day. The eviction moratorium is obviously one of the biggest things that happened during the pandemic, and it's been recently renewed, and it's before that was in effect for a long part of the COVID pandemic. April, in St. Louis, what have you seen to be the effects of the moratorium?
I would say the eviction moratorium, it was a critical need. It actually prevented thousands of households from being evicted or foreclosed on. It was a challenge once again, because while we had this large sums of funds sent from the federal government to the state and from the state to the city, and then there was a second round that came directly to the city, you still had to instantly set up a structure to create a program to handle this large number of individuals who was facing a threat of eviction. I would say that I believe we have some great nonprofits, that service providers that were ready to go to work and to increase their capacity. We have also created some relationships with legal service entities that, on the other side of that, while it's not just enough to pay a person's back rent, their rent that's in arrears, plus you can pay X amount of months going forward, there may be fees, there may be moving costs. Who's going to secure the moving company? Not everybody's eviction can you prevent. Some people have already been evicted. And so you had to also have case management to help them find a new location and to pay their deposit and security. And so we are currently doing that. We have contracts with these legal services that help those individuals who are on the dockets in the eviction courts, and they educate them, one, on what we've seen some illegal evictions going on through this, even through the eviction freeze, but also on their tenant rights. And so these attorneys assist them for free, handle their cases, try to negotiate with the landlords to make everybody whole. Now, there are some cases where the tenant was a problem tenant and the landlord doesn't want them to remain in the unit, even with the assistance. And so those are things that have to be mediated. So we also have created and increased mediation programs. And so you really have to look at every component of what it takes to stabilize these households. And oftentimes it is not just simply pay the rent. Fortunately, Congress did allow for many functions within the qualifications of the federal dollars that came down, the emergency rental um, assistance program, which you allow to assist with mortgage as well as with utilities. And so, but once again, you got to quickly stand up a structure. So you definitely needed the moratorium to put a freeze on to even give you time to set up programs, increase capacity of those existing programs, and create the infrastructure to get the funds to the landlords. And in the second round, there has been some changes that now allows you to give funds directly to the tenant if the landlord is not responding. Sometimes the landlords don't respond, or they don't respond in a short period of time. And so after you've made so many attempts, you can give the funds to the tenant to pay the rent. And of course, they have to sign different affidavits pledging that they will pay the rent and give receipts. But once again, I just read an article in USA Today. This is a challenge. There are delays across this country with getting the money to the for rental and mortgage assistance to the tenants and landlords, because it takes time for them to gather the documents, scan the documents. We do have nonprofits to assist those individuals who don't have Wi-Fi or don't know how to use it. But for an individual who does, they can go online and from the beginning to the end and complete the process. And so now that we are in the second year of dealing with the crisis, we are going back looking at how we can improve and create additional software programs that can lessen the period of time that it takes from an applicant applying to actually receiving the funds, the landlord receiving the funds, fees being taken care of, or finding them other permanent housing. We know that it is critical when it comes to households facing eviction to prevent the eviction. There's plenty of data that shows once a person has experienced an eviction, they are more likely to experience another eviction. And so you have to think about what it does to their child not having a home. How can they attend school? How can you get the medical care you need? So on and so forth. So many things start to spiral down after you faced an eviction. So key is to prevent the eviction and to come up with systems that can more rapidly get the resources to the tenants and the landlords.
And Mike, what have you seen as a result of the eviction moratorium?
Um, so a lot of it came to a head before I took over as construction official in the town I'm in, but we have a lot of seasonal activities in the town I work in. So you have hotels on top of seasonal rentals. So there has been issues with different hotels where people came in, paid for a week, and then now they've stayed there for a year and a half. And the hotel owners obviously are not happy with that. It's cutting into their revenues twice a year. More importantly, it messes up the local economy in a couple of areas. However, sorry. We have seasonal rentals and stuff too, where people, they rent a little house for nothing and peanuts in the winter and then a lot in the summertime because they're on the beach. And we have a lot of people that seem to just stay over. So they paid their winter rentals, then all of a sudden they couldn't make their rent when it came to summer, so they wanted to stay. So I understand there's people get put in bad situations, but some of them you wonder exactly what that situation was. And then same thing with April saying, you got to get these programs out. So supposedly there's money in New Jersey to do these types of things to help with landlord and rentals assistance. It's not advertised. I mean, I keep an eye out for it. I couldn't tell you where it is right now in New Jersey. I think it does need to go to the landlords, because I'm under the understanding and seeing out of the data that most of the rentals that I have in the area, the county, most of New Jersey, are mom and pop rentals. So it's not some corporate structure that's renting out, 40 units at a complex. It's a couple that, instead of having their 401k or a pension, put their money into two homes, and now they're not getting rental income out of it, but they're still having to pay the mortgage, because eventually they might be able to kick the people out because they didn't pay rent over 2 years, but that mortgage wasn't paid for 2 years, or it sucked up whatever savings or other income they had. So it definitely has a butterfly effect going forward. New Jersey going into COVID was one of the worst states for foreclosure to begin with since 2009's economic issues. I'm sorry, 2008's. So I would think many areas of New Jersey are probably going to have issues with foreclosures again. The market price for real estate right now in New Jersey, just like everywhere else, has kind of skyrocketed. So my fear is that maybe there'll be a cliff on the other side once we go past this moratorium and people start getting foreclosed on. So I don't know if it'll be a housing glut or people just get good deals, because there might be enough people in the market still to buy, but we'll see what happens. It's definitely going to have a long-term economic effect, just like 2008's market crash had an effect up till COVID in housing in New Jersey.
Yeah, and to kind of touch on a little bit of what you were talking about, one thing that a lot of people bring up with the eviction moratorium is that there needs to be a way that it is fair to not only tenants, but also landlords. And so, Mike, I want to go back to you with this one, but what is the best solution for making things fair for both sides? And what are some of the inequities? You've talked about it a little bit, but what are some of the inequities as far as that's concerned that need to be addressed?
So if it's a program, it needs to be run by someone that maybe covers the whole state, and it needs to be simple. I make programs up for new laws and ordinances that are in my town all the time. It needs to be 2 or 3 simple things. The landlord must apply or the renter must apply. You need to provide the lease or proof of payment or bank statements. You need to show 2 or 3 simple things to get the process done. And then you need to make it clear to everybody that check is either going to go to the landlord or it's going to go to the renter, and it has to go to the landlord. Or I would take as many steps out of it as possible. If I was running the program, I'd have the landlords fill it out. If they have a mortgage, the money goes straight to the mortgage, and mortgage companies have to take away the arrears of the landlord, because tenant had a bad deal, the landlord had a bad deal. Granted, the mortgage company had a bad deal, but they're going to be made whole with maybe federal money, maybe not, who knows at the end of the day. But if they are, it should be wiped clean, in my thought, for everybody, because not everyone had a reason for something to go bad. And then going forward with these different tenants and landlords, it's a lot of it's got to be communication. They get pissed off at each other. Many times they end up in my office, literally yelling at each other. And now I'm the referee at worldwide wrestling type of thing. And it's, no, you both have bad situations. Let's communicate. I don't think anybody's, no one did it on purpose, but it's difficult. So it does lay on top of the local officials to try and solve something, but there's no funds in a local municipal budget to take care of, what could be hundreds of thousands of dollars in back rent. So, but it does affect the property taxes in the long run if that rents aren't paid and houses get foreclosed on. So, everyone should take a little bit of a piece of the pie to help figure out what they could do, because it does affect everybody at the end of the day.
Yeah, and April, I want to go back to you on this sort of same topic. Have you seen friction between tenants and landlords, and what can be done to make sure that everyone in this scenario is feeling like, they've been made whole by the process, and that the process has been fair to both sides.
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. Um, in our city, once again, when you have a large population of people who are um, heavily burdened from housing, either that they can't afford, or 70 to 80% of all of their income generally go to pay their housing, they are already living with a lot of lack. And so many of them don't have access to scanners, to printers, to the Wi-Fi. There's a large unbanked population. There are issues that just come with poverty, no matter where it is. Okay. So when you have concentrated poverty, you have people who don't have checking accounts, so they can't easily pull up a financial bank statement to show you that where they've paid their rent each month or their utilities each month, because some of them are paying in cash. Landlord is giving them a paper receipt. They don't know where the receipt is. So once again, that takes the landlord participating. And the great thing is landlords can initiate the request for assistance. It doesn't have to be a tenant. It can be a tenant or a landlord. But eventually you need both of them to sign off and say, yes, I do owe that rent. That is the amount of my rent. And I do want to get the assistance. And we also try to get the landlords to agree to allow that person to stay for several months going forward. Because once again, it would make no sense to you pay all the arrears and any fees, but then the person to prevent them from becoming homeless, and then next month they get put out. So you also want an agreement with the landlord. None of it is difficult. The complication comes in when you're dealing with populations that don't have the wherewithal and the ability to complete this process and to complete it quickly. Now, think about this. You have the money. So the government has given you, say, $15 million for rental assistance. You have nonprofits who are willing to facilitate the case management and distribute the funds to the landlords and work with the tenants. But once again, they need people. So COVID cases are increasing in our city. 80% of all the recent uh, COVID cases are African Americans who are also living in low to moderate income at income levels. You have only little more than 20% of the African Americans who have been vaccinated. So you have a city with a large population of unvaccinated residents. You have less than 50% of the city vaccinated. So that means the nonprofits and the service providers are going to have people who are um, being infected with COVID and are spreading. You need the public to come in so that you can get their information and you can upload it into the portal that's been created, this centralized system. Well, you're taking a risk when you're allowing the public to come in. So every day you have some issues to deal with your own staff calling in, your own staff having to quarantine. So while you thought you had things, a structure in place to move through these applications, you too are dealing with the real issues of people being put at risk and people becoming positive for COVID, as well as the public that comes in that you're trying to protect. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. I've seen the systems improved, and hopefully they'll continue to. You have some large companies who are out of state who see the need and have created software programs that many states have contracted them to provide for this specific source of funding. So they are equipped and they are aware of the federal regulations. So they are able to put together a structure for you. You pay them a fee for each the client that they serve, but there are systems in place that many of the states have utilized to try to move these applications and get this assistance out. But the federal money came with federal guidance. And at the end of the day, we have to submit monthly and quarterly reports. We will undergo audits. Every department and agencies that received and used this funding, and any municipalities that are found to be not in compliance and did not follow the guidance on the use of the funds will be required to pay those funds back. So in the midst of it all, you definitely don't want to have to pay millions of dollars back, right? So we got to get it right. And that takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to switch gears just quickly to another issue that we've touched on a little bit so far, but one of the issues that's really been brought into focus during the pandemic um, is the issue of people experiencing homelessness. And I know that that's affected all corners of the country, but I want to get into sort of your specific communities and what you've seen and your interactions with homeless populations. And so, April, I'll start with you. Um, how has the pandemic exacerbated existing issues with homelessness, and are there any new issues that have come up because of the pandemic that have been particularly tricky as far as um, finding a way to deal with that issue?
Yes, absolutely. Having a large homeless population and some who are considered to be long-standing homeless because some of them of their choice and their mental state, they refuse to go into a shelter or permanent housing, living quarters. And so reality is you cannot make individuals come off the street, but while they're on the street, they certainly are at a higher risk of death as well as experiencing more violence and drug addiction. And so that has increased. We actually have intentional encampments for individuals who want to continue to live outside, but trying to create a structure and a safe haven for them. And so we have set up areas, and the planning has continued to go on, and new areas having to be created where you have the tents, but you also have security, you have resources for them to get food, you have centers where you can come into to get out of the cold or get out of the heat. And when they are in those centers, you provide case management to assess their needs and to try to get them to shelters and to get them into from shelters into permanent housing, even supportive housing, where after they get a rental unit, it's one where you have some case management on site so that they can receive the benefits that they need to allow, if it's a chore worker, if it's a mental health worker, if it's going to get their medicines that they can't afford, or apply for state benefits that will give them health insurance to be able to get pay for their medicines. You have those type of programs that have increased. Before COVID, we were spending the city about $11 million a year. That's just in federal funds on homeless prevention and homeless needs. And so now that has significantly increased. And once again, you have people who have recently become homeless. So you are trying to rapidly rehouse them. And that takes caseworkers, not just any caseworker, but caseworkers who have a skill set of dealing with the homeless, who've been doing this and know how to get them through the system. Once again, we have to have the data. So we have to do it in a way where you are collecting data on how many people you're talking to, how many people you've served, how long, how many days they've been homeless, how many nights have they spent in the shelters. We are standing up additional emergency shelters. We also have programs to move them into motels and hotels that we've gotten agreements with, and we pay them for a certain amount of days. Many of the programs allow you to pay for 90 days worth of their stay. You need to get them bus tickets for transportation. You need to oftentimes help them get IDs, birth certificates, the documents that it takes to get them into a permanent housing situation and apply for their benefits for them to be able to maintain after they are out of the shelters and temporary housing. And so it's so many pieces. It is a massive effort, but there have been many different housing initiatives set up to address the homeless and those who have recently become homeless.
And Mike, I'll turn to you. How have you seen the issue of people experiencing homelessness manifest in your community?
So April covered a lot of the same stuff. However, being more of a suburban community, we don't have any shelters. We do have warming and cooling centers that we've done before in different communities and schools and rec centers and stuff when it gets really hot or cold. However, I did notice definitely over the last winter, it seemed like less of those came online in the worst parts of the winter. I haven't really even seen any notifications of any in the summertime, even though it's been hot a couple days. So I don't know that we're doing that as much as we used to under the guise of, oh, we can't put a bunch of people in a room anymore because of COVID. And then they're definitely getting some funds to help. There's definitely homeless people in the county I live in. And kind of like April said, there's definitely encampments. I worked closely with dispersing one years ago in a previous job where they came in as a municipality and the county government and actually paid everyone's rent for a year to get them set up. So they put in a significant amount of money and time to do that. But again, like April said, a lot of the people just wanted to be there because they wanted to, it's the life they wanted to live. A lot of it had to do with substance abuse, and they didn't want to deal with landlords or whatever association they might move into because they'd rather just sit around and unfortunately deal with the substance abuse that they had. So we still have some of that. Most of that I think is just put into hotels and motels. That's county kind of what they do in begin with, but it was short term and they tried to help people. I think they're just doing that in a slightly longer term right now. And it'll come to a head when some of those federal funds or state funds dry up, because then they're going to have to deal with the problem more than putting people in hotels and motels. So I don't know what their answer is. It's not part of my job at the moment. My job in the town I live in, and I'm sorry, the town I work in, we do definitely have seasonal people come through. However, there's no immediate homeless issues, thankfully, in our town for me to have to handle. So we'll see what happens with the county. I'm sure I'll be involved at some point in what they decide to try and do, or if we start coming up with ideas.
Yeah, and kind of as we sort of start to wrap up here, I want to get more towards a forward-looking approach. When all this began, there seemed to be an expectation that American life would return to normal by, summer of 2020, which, it's August 19th now, 2021, and we all know that's not the case. But what steps should be taken from here to ensure that the housing market is serving the needs of both tenants and landlords moving forward? And what needs to happen from this point to make sure that we address some of the problems that we know we now are saddled with in an effective way as we look to getting back to a more of a normal sort of pace and routine to everyday life? And Mike, I'll start with you.
Sure. So got to make things clear. Whatever programs that we do come up with to help landlords and tenants, they got to have a marketing plan behind them. Essentially, you got to let people know what they are and how they do them before they start calling and asking questions. I think it can be done. We just got to figure out what level of government is going to do that. I think the housing market as a whole, from what I see it with construction, it's going crazy. The town I'm working was heavily affected by Superstorm Sandy, and we have as many building permits and stuff going on now as we did post Sandy. So we had half the town essentially destroyed by a hurricane, and had a lot of work going on. There's no hurricane now; it's just a disease, but there's just as much work going on. So that causes a market shift where, you know, it's not making it affordable for anybody to do anything. So, but we have cheap money in mortgages right now. So it's eventually the cheap money and the amount of work that's going on is going to hit some kind of peak and hopefully come back to normal. But the question is, does it come back to where it's affordable for people wanting to get into the housing market for the first time? Or is it affordable for people that want to downsize and move somewhere else? I don't know. I don't think it's going to be that way for the next 12 months. So that's just regular people. Everyone, you know, whole family has a job. They have access to cash and mortgages. They're dealing with a housing problem. So everyone else that doesn't have that ability too is just going to be exacerbated to be even worse. So I don't particularly have answers, but as we get back to protocols where manufacturing of different materials needed for building becomes better and the supply lines become better, at least the cost for construction will come down. The question then is also, is the labor market going to be there for construction as well? Because no matter what, we need to build new housing. There's more millennials and different people getting into the housing market than there ever was before. And now you have somewhat of a push from people moving from urban areas to suburban areas. I don't know if that'll switch and go back, which will take some of the pressure off the single family housing market. But if it doesn't, you know, there's more cost to production and materials that goes into building a single family house than building an 80 unit building. So you have a lot of other scope to look at there. But if people don't want to live on top of each other because they're afraid of COVID through the future, you're going to have to change the way we do housing. So,
in April,
my non-answer.
In April, I'll pose the same question to you. So where do we go from here? What ways can we sort of learn from the pandemic, and as things start to move back towards normal, you know, where's the housing market headed, and where do you think it should be headed?
Yes, I would say it's really one in the same. And what I mean by one in the same, the issues are the same, whether they were pre-COVID or they are post-COVID. What COVID has done, as we have experienced almost this instantaneous crisis, it has just shown and exactly how critical the existing needs already were. And now that they have been increased, it's very hard to ignore them, the realities of our state of living. While in St. Louis, we have experienced more decrease in population since we have received the census information recently. Just in the last week, we know that we have lost an additional 18,000 people. And technically, we are no longer considered a major city, but we have all the issues of a major city. You still have the same amount of mileage as you did when our population was 800,000, over 800,000, and now we're right up under 300,000. So you still have many issues that have to be addressed. And while those have all increased, I think with the new funds under the Biden administration, you have the American Rescue Plan that has sent more funds to all the states across the country. I think that while it's challenging, it also presents a unique opportunity. We are getting a large surge of funds that I think that with good planning, we have to move quickly, but we must take time to plan. If we plan it right, we can address many of the issues that will continue to remain if we do not address them appropriately, like the infrastructure, like the housing, the affordable housing. It's far more people who need affordable units than there are market rate and upper income units. So it doesn't make sense to continue to build on a larger scale for those who are a very few in the higher income bracket than there are in the lower income bracket. And so we have an opportunity to be successful if we make the investments more equitable this time. If we implement strategies and initiatives that truly bring a social and economic justice that will close the wealth gap, that will close the education gap, the health gap, the affordable housing gap, as it relates to those people who live in this city and who have stayed. We must close the unemployment gap and bring more businesses. We were doing a pretty good job with bringing businesses, attracting more companies. St. Louis is a very affordable place to live. The land is affordable. But once again, if we have to subsidize through incentives, everything that we develop, we will be going at a very slow rate. Another great thing with this new funding that has come, you can, as a city and municipality, address your revenue loss that was created because of COVID. The first influx of funds did not allow that. Now you have that. So that's a cushion that can create a foundation for us to spring off of and to begin to build back better. And so we are working at that. We're dealing with the crisis once again diligently, continuing with those programs who have been successful and trying to revamp those and create new initiatives to address the critical need. I'm hopeful with that we will be able to build back the economy. It will take time. It will take time, but we do have people who love this great city, who have been committed and are giving of their time and their resources. So I'm hopeful that that will continue. And once again, we all will be able to agree upon COVID does not discriminate. It has it has brought a crisis and to all of our homes, no matter what your income level. And so we ought to now be in a mindset to be willing to help those who are less fortunate, who are more vulnerable, because if they remain weak, the conditions will remain weak and the circumstances will hurt the entire region. And so I think that we have learned many lessons, and I think that it has been on a national platform. And so I'm hopeful that, we will come together and unite and continue to work towards bringing what's right to our city, but to the whole region and to the whole country.
Well, I know we're running a little low on time now, so I wanted to make one announcement for our viewers, which is that as our exchange work transitions and has continued to transition to virtual engagement during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's vital that we measure the impact and effects of the virtual town hall series for our funders. We seek to do this via a short exit survey that will ask you to note one key takeaway from the session in addition to a few other questions. Zoom attendants can view the survey link on the Zoom post attendee screen, and will also receive it in an email tomorrow. Viewers on Facebook Live and YouTube can find the survey link in the video description on the respective platform. And thank you in advance for taking the survey and helping us measure the impact of our programming during this time. But to April and Mike, thank you both so much for joining us with this town hall and for giving your insight and sharing your experiences. And we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you as well. And hello to all my ACYPL friends and alumni. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much, and we will see you all later.
Okay.